Hi, this is Jeff Curto, and welcome to episode number 171 of Camera Position, the podcast about the creative side of photography. Anyone can print black. Just put a piece of photo paper under the enlarger, turn the enlarger light on, and leave it on. But light values, light values. They're the soul of the black and white photograph. Not everyone can print white and have it sing. So said, and I'm paraphrasing, one of my great photo teachers, Neil Rappaport, who I studied with at Bennett College in Vermont in the early 1980s, and I took that advice to heart. Both in the darkroom days of printing black and white photographs in the darkroom, and also now still in the digital era, printing photographs, black and white or color, but especially black and white photographs, using digital technologies, whether I'm shooting film, developing that film and scanning it, and then printing those pictures digitally, or if I am shooting digitally and converting to black and white. A couple of episodes ago, we talked about the idea of black and white and about how to learn black and white, and one of the things that I mentioned was the idea of going to a local gallery or museum, especially a museum if they have a photography study room. And of course, it depends a lot on where you live and what access you have to museums or galleries in your local area. But I have really lived most of my life, except for those couple of years out in Vermont. I've lived most of my life in the Chicago area in Illinois, USA. And that area here in Chicago has a bunch of different great resources. The photography study room at the Art Institute of Chicago is one that I have spent quite a bit of time in over the years and used as a tremendous resource to allow myself to get tuned in to how photographers use tone and how photographers use value. And that whole idea of anyone can print black, just put a piece of photo paper under the enlarger, turn the light on, is true. Of course, there are subtle black values. I'm sure I'll have photographers telling me about subtle black values, and perhaps we'll talk about those in a future episode of Camera Position. But I suppose today's episode was really inspired by thinking about that quote and thinking about an experience I had at the Art Institute of Chicago's photo study room, looking at a photograph by the great American photographer Paul Strand, a photograph entitled Mr. Bennett, Vermont, 1944. And I was sitting down with a box of Strand's photographs, and in fact I had asked the curatorial assistant at the study room to pull out a box of Strand photographs because I had to admit, at least at the time, I didn't quite get it. Because I'd seen a lot of Strand's photographs in galleries and at that particular museum even, and to me they'd always looked a little dark. They looked a little muddy, and I couldn't figure out why these prints were often called into sort of the pantheon of great photographic prints. And it was sitting in front of this photograph by Paul Strand of Mr. Bennett where I finally got it. It finally clicked for me. And what I realized was that there was this one white tone in what was otherwise a very gray photograph. The gray photograph kind of telling us about Mr. Bennett, about his hard life, the combination of the rough wood behind him and his rough, furrowed face and even his unshaven face, all of those things combining to tell us a lot about Mr. Bennett, who he was, how he lived, what his life was like. And there was this one little section, the top left corner of the button on his shirt. And it was that one little tiny piece of white, that one little itty-bitty piece of white that gave the image its life. The rest of the image printed dark to convey a mood, to convey a sense of who this man was, and yet there was this one little piece of white in the photograph. And it wasn't the whole button, it wasn't even section or a half of the button. It was just this tiny little piece of reflection on the top of the button that Strand had allowed in his print to go pure white, to paper white. Man, that was an amazing experience for me, because it was at that moment that I realized how white values could really be tuned to give us a sense of what it is that the photograph is going to talk about, and how those white values can really sort of give us that notion of how we want our viewers to consider that photograph. And of course, since then, I have really been very much more attuned, even though I'd taken the advice way back when I was in my 20s to pay attention to the light values of the photograph. That one experience in the probably 1990s really changed my sense of how I would use white values in black and white photographs from there on out. And of course, one of the big advantages we have, any of us who are using digital technologies to either print our analog film photographs or to do more with the photographs we're creating digitally, we have amazing control, pinpoint control, over what white values look like and how they look in a photograph. And I was really amazed to discover that Strand had very carefully considered that one white value, and that was the only white value he was going to let exist in the photograph. Not the string that's tied through Mr. Bennett's buttonhole, but a little tiny highlight on the button. So again, I think that the way to really learning about how to express yourself in black and white photography, and I think some of these things tip over into the world of color as well, looking at great photographs works. And the more great photographs you look at, the more your experiences of being able to understand what great photographs are supposed to look like, how that plays into your sense of your style as a photographer. So go look at great photographs. I've put Strand's Mr. Bennett and a detail of that picture both on the cameraposition.com blog page and also in the app. I'm also going to link to a kind of long ago history of photography podcast, a podcast I made in 2009 on a visit to the Art Institute of Chicago's photo study room. And I thought some of you may be interested in listening to that because it sort of goes at the ideas of looking at photographs and how we consider photographs. And I'll also add that in the app. For those of you who have the app, I'll add it in that extras section. So you won't even have to go anywhere to see it. You can listen right from the app. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Camera Position, the podcast about the creative side of photography.